So I'm Maria Ivanova. I'm the director of the Policy School on the Boston campus. Today we are here courtesy of our Arlington, Virginia campus. We will hear from the CEO and regional dean in a minute, Jamie Miller, to welcome us to this space. And I'm delighted to be here also with Tracy Corley, who's the director of programs for the College of Social Sciences and Humanities here in the Arlington campus. I see faces that I recognize in the room, and hello, Dan Reeve-Snyder. I have to say hello because this is what DC, this area does. It brings people who care about the same issues into these common spaces, no matter how many years have passed since they have seen each other. And this is the spirit in which we gather here today, and I'm delighted that our Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, Kelly Tsai, is also here. So with this, Jamie, over to you. Welcome us because I am the guest here. This is your space.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, welcome everyone to the Northeastern Arlington campus. We opened our doors about a year and a half ago, and it has been an amazing journey as the Arlington campus has joined Northeastern University's global network of campuses. In fact, we are one of 13 campuses across Northeastern's global network. And in that spirit, I want to congratulate at least the two recent grads who are here. Raise your hand. We've got a recent grad over here. There was a recent grad in the back. There she is. Congratulations. Both have successfully taken steps in their field of study into their career path and their career journey. And that is why I said yes to joining the team at Northeastern University and doing a really scary thing in launching a physical campus, right, to bring students and researchers and professionals and partners together, just as Maria said. My background is in national security. I worked at Capitol Hill and at the Pentagon for the better part of 20 years. And when Northeastern reached out to me and said they wanted to launch a campus here in the National Capital Region, literally at just the footsteps away from the Pentagon and Capitol Hill and the White House and the Diplomatic Corps and all the think tanks and NGOs and the government contractors, to help build this talent pipeline to fill the mission critical skills gaps that we're seeing across government and industry. And that's what sparked my enthusiasm and my interest in saying yes. And then the opportunity to meet with people who've graduated from Northeastern, all eras, if I might say so, and then current students. So we have a current Northeastern student here, a co-op student. Raise your hand, say hi. This is really what is so exciting about Northeastern. And I hear two things, and I heard two things just today. I had two alumni talking about how their co-op experience and experiential learning that they did at Northeastern launched their career path. And it set them up for success in the workforce. It's pretty awesome to hear that. And then the second thing I heard is that the Northeastern network is so strong. And to me, that is really exciting because we are leveraging that here in the National Capital Region. So our programs, we have 4 of Northeastern's colleges. This fall, we'll be running 13 graduate programs, mostly in STEM, but also we have tremendous public policy, our public administration programs from the College of Social Sciences and the Humanities, and then some other programs we'll be launching here as well. So a very fulsome opportunity at this intersection of technology and innovation and security and policy in an only in DC environment. So thank you for being a part of that here today as we bring a little bit of Northeastern to all of you, and a tremendous appreciation and thank you to our partners at the College of Social Sciences and the Humanities and the School of Public Policy who have been with us since day one. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. And I can't wait to take some notes on this particular topic. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Dean Sai, welcome to Northeastern.
Just very briefly, this is my first visit to the Arlington campus, and I can't express how inspired I am by all that is already going on and what lies ahead. Because one thing that Northeastern has always excelled in is its signature co-op education, experiential learning, but it's also an R1 research university. And to bridge that together, to have translational impact is something that our policy school is, I think, uniquely equipped to achieve. And while there's a lot of interest in science and technology and policy in this area generally, the fact that we have expertise in sustainability, in climate justice, in social justice, we really have an opportunity to build a distinct Northeastern brand in this region. So thank you to our guests for joining us, and I think this is just the beginning of many conversations that the Policy School will be hosting here on campus. And I look forward to following everything that everyone goes on to do. We're part of the Husky Pack and Network.
So at this time, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to get mic'd up. But if you could, Maria, just tell us just a little bit about the Policy School. And we heard a little bit about what makes us unique, but it would be great to kind of just hear a little bit more from you as the director of the Policy School about how we have, where we've been and where we're going.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and in the future we can imagine what this place would look like. I joined Northeastern two years ago to direct the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, or the Policy School. I joined Northeastern after 12 years at the University of Massachusetts in Boston at the Policy School there, the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies. And it is a great privilege to be the director of the Policy School at Northeastern because, as Dean Sai said, we are defined by scholarship with impact and experiential learning. We have 13 campuses, as Jamie Miller pointed out, and this campus is at the intersection of scholarship with impact and experiential learning. What defines us in the Policy School is indeed that North Star of scholarship with impact. Whether it's at the local level in Roxbury or Dorchester in Boston, whether it is at the state level in Massachusetts or West Virginia, at the national level right here in DC, at the international level, we have work across South Asia, East Asia, across all countries, most countries in Africa, in Latin America, or at the global level. We're one of the few schools that are integrated into the United Nations in the negotiations of new global treaties. This is why we're here today, to talk about how do we think about creating new international treaties, whether it's on plastics, whether it's on chemicals, on pollution, whether it's climate. And so being able to talk about policy with impact from the very local to the very global level in one breath, and then being able to show, here is what I do, here is the impact of my work, and here is the long-term effect, the sustainability of it is absolutely exceptional. It is unique, and that is what Northeastern brings here. And so as a policy school, we have a base in Boston. We now have a very strong presence here in the capital, national capital region. We are starting programs in Oakland, in California. We will grow. We'll do even more. And what we are looking for now is the partnerships. How do we partner with you, with your institution, with you personally? How do we carry over these relationships? I've started doing this work when I was a student. That's how I know Dan Reef-Snyder there. People know you for a long time. And so all of you who are students here, when you start working with the Northeastern faculty, you're starting to be seen in the world as the expert in. Fill in the blank. Are you the expert in housing, in transportation, in environment, in sustainability? You will carry that. And this is what the Northeastern experience will give you. It's the connection and the visibility, but then you have to deliver on it. Day in and day out, and be proud of it. And enter it with passion, with purpose. Just nurture that talent. This is what we're here for, not as teachers, but as mentors, not as instructors, but as partners in that lifelong journey. And I'm really delighted that we are here to a large extent because of Ray Ludwiszewski, who is a Northeastern alum. And yes, we met over lunch, Ray. And we had a discussion. We said, hey, wouldn't it be great to re-energize the Northeastern alumni with a policy school twist to it, with an environmental passion? And I'm really delighted that you are now engaging, re-engaging, because you went to a Northeastern of a different era. And you are seeing how it has changed, and it's an upward spiral. It just keeps changing, but it's an upward trajectory. And connecting us with that national space, but also with the international. And this is why, Raphael, I'm so happy that you're here as the director of the Northeastern, of the North America.
No, not yet.
Office, the North America office of the UN Environment Program, but as a Northeastern partner. And really, really happy to be here. The Policy School is delighted to be part of this space. And Tracy, thank you so much for offering the space.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria. We're just delighted to have you back because we actually had a conversation last May about the green skills gap. And today we want to talk a little bit more. We titled it Gavels in Governance, to talk about legal actions and the ways that legal actions are being used to advance environmental justice around the world, locally and globally. You know, as we kind of thinking about kind of spanning the diversity of jurisdictions that exist between our local neighborhoods up to the global and international level. But before we get started, I want to just do a quick introduction of who's up here today. I guess I can start with myself because I am, as Maria mentioned, the Director of Programs for the College of Social Sciences and Humanities here on the Arlington campus. And as also a professor of the practice in public policy and urban affairs, I'm very heartened to see a number of our students here. As you were talking, Maria, about, you know, thinking about us not as instructors, but as mentors, because I like to tell everyone, you know, look around the room, because, you know, even me as an instructor, I look around and my students today might be my boss tomorrow. It is a very small world, and a lot of the kind of global impact work that we do, and no matter what scale you're working at, you know, we're all part of a community once you actually join the policy school and the Northeastern community as a whole. And so I am someone who, at my master's as well as PhD from Northeastern, got my undergrad in architecture from Clemson University in South Carolina, for anybody who might know that university. But, you know, I graduated from undergrad and left and didn't really look back. But whenever I left Northeastern, I just couldn't kind of escape its orbit. So next thing I know, I'm serving on committees and teaching part-time while serving in other positions. But my background led me from architecture to sustainable development and economic development, always with an environmental focus to my work. And it just so happens that kind of coming to Northeastern gave me an opportunity to start working more in the research space, working in a think tank in Massachusetts, advocating for inclusive and equitable transit-oriented development, and also working as the research director in an environmental NGO before coming back to Northeastern to kind of help work with Regional Dean Miller and her team on kind of launching our campus here and setting up our programs. But I'm going to actually, unfortunately, read the bios for our other speakers who are up here today. But I'm just going to be moderating today, and I have some questions that I'm going to pose to the group, and then we're going to open it up for questions from all of you. And the first person that we have, I'm actually going to go down the line here so people know who we're talking about, is Rafael Peralta. is the regional director for North America UN Environment Program. Um, has been in that position since July 1st, 2023. He's also served as Chief of Staff of UNEP since April 2021 after working as Acting Chief of Staff in 2019. So joined the UNEP in 2018 as Deputy Chief of Staff and has over 20 years of experience in the United Nations and beyond, working at the intersection of sustainable development, peace and security in a number of countries and regions, including Haiti, the Central African Republic, sorry, not Republican, that is wrong, West Africa, the Western Balkans, and Somalia. So prior to UNEP, Raphael served as Senior Political Affairs Officer in the Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York from 2015 to 2018 in the Central African Republic. And before that, worked in West Africa and the Sahel, supporting political process in the region as well as post-conflict stabilization in Somalia and in Haiti. So he also has other diplomatic experience, but coming to us originally from Spain, it seems, and also holds a master's degree in international relations from the Brussels School of International Studies, University of Kent at Canterbury, and a degree in law from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid.
You almost got that one right.
Yeah, no hablo español. So,
that was fantastic.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Thank you. And then next to him, we have, of course, Maria Ivanova, who is the director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, or the Policy School, here at Northeastern, focusing on international environmental institutions, environmental sustainability, and science, and the interface between science and policy. She is the author of Untold Story of the World's Leading Environmental Institution, UNEP at 50, which is printed in 2021. And she has also published on global environmental governance, the UNEP, climate change, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, among other topics related to environmental issues as well as climate change. In 2022, Professor Ivanova was named one of 66 inaugural Foundation Fellows of the International Science Council, the highest honor awarded by the Council in recognition of contributions to her role in the science of promoting the global public good. For 12 years, Professor Ivanova also served as the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, where she directed the Center for Governance and Sustainability and the PhD program in Global Governance and Human Security. And I can't believe I'm just getting started and already I'm getting tired of talking. So and the last person I want to introduce here before we get started is Ray Lubicheski. So did I get that right?
Ray.
Okay, Ray. Ray, who is a partner at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. And so he's at the DC office here. He joined the firm actually in the Environmental Litigation and Mass Tort Practice Group after spending 8 years in senior legal positions in the United States government dealing with environmental regulatory issues and litigation in the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, let me spell that out, make sure for those who might not know, and the Justice Department. Under EPA Administrator William Riley, Ray served as General Counsel at the US EPA in Washington. Before assuming that position, he served as Assistant Administrator for Enforcement at the EPA, and before that, he held a number of senior positions at the United States Department of Justice with an emphasis on environmental litigation. First, he was Special Counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division, and subsequently, he was Associate Deputy Attorney General. And with that, I'm going to actually get us started with some questions. And so let me get my tablet working properly here and get us started. I would love for each of you to kind of just spend 5 minutes giving us an overview and a status of your recent work related to environmental policy and governance, just so we get a sense of what legal actions are kind of happening right now in environmental justice. So who wants to go first?
I'll be happy to. I'll be brief. I have a full service environmental practice. I focus largely on litigation, sometimes defending corporations in enforcement actions, civil and criminal, sometimes defending them against mass tort actions, think of the Aaron Brockovich type circumstance, but also providing regulatory legislative. In the environmental justice or EGA area recently, there's been an increase of activity, dramatic increase of activity with the Biden administration and the focus that has come out of the bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the money that that provided to private sector and also the public sector, and the changes that that put into place on issues like permitting and grants and government contracts, and the requirements that that is now focused on the environmental justice aspects of those government actions. So that's sort of an overview of what I've been doing.
Great, I'll go next. So I work on global environmental governance. I have been doing so since the 1990s. A lot of people say my professional career has been circuitous. Mine has not. It's been from point A onward because I did a program, the Williams Mystic Maritime program in the fall of 1993 that got me inspired about environment, and I have stayed with that inspiration ever since. Yes, the issues change, but the North Star is there. How do we create better environmental governance? And how do we do that from the local to the global? I was born and raised in Bulgaria. I came to the US in 1992 to go to college, went to Mount Holyoke College, because I received the full scholarship. As many of the international students here will know, we go where it's possible to go. And then you get inspired by a professor, by what you do in the classroom, by the experiences that you are allowed to create for yourself. And so I started studying UNEP in the 1990s because of my professor at Yale, Dan Esty, whom Ray knows well. And that's how we started convening regular global environmental governance dialogues, where we would bring people together, governments, businesses, NGOs, thinkers, doers, and dreamers is what we now say we are at the Policy School, a community of thinkers, doers, and dreamers. This is what we started in the 1990s, and we have continued doing this. And so I now have brought that project or that work to Northeastern, to the Policy School. But this is how I have met people, whether they're in the government or in the international organizations, and have become the scholar of UNEP. So I've written the biography of UNEP and the 50 years of the organization, and I entered this space understanding how we create institutions, how they function, how they malfunction, and with the ambition of doing something about it. And that's how I inhabit this space. And most recently, I've been engaged in the plastics negotiations, and this is something that we will be talking about today, with the ambition of thinking through how do we create a functional, ambitious yet pragmatic international treaty that would allow us to eliminate plastic pollution, to decrease our dependence on plastic, to be better citizens. And this is how I've been engaged now with this international process, and I'm delighted to say that Northeastern is one of the few academic institutions that are accredited to UNEP. And so we actually now bring a delegation to the UN Environment Assembly, to the International Negotiating Committee on the treaty. But I've had the pleasure of, and the honor of being on the delegation of Rwanda when the treaty was being put forth as a resolution at the UN Environment Assembly, and then the delegation of the International Science Council. And now that Northeastern has a delegation itself, finally I get to head our own delegation. And we just came back from Ottawa where we had a significant delegation of Northeastern faculty, students, and partners. So it's with this science policy connection that I enter this space and would welcome any of you who are interested in working on these international treaty issues, and especially with a view toward a new plastics agreement.
Thank you, Maria. Rafael?
Thank you. And I shall start by correcting Maria a tiny bit, because she said she's been an academic, she's been researching UNEP, but you're actually a rock star in UNEP. When she walks around our halls, when she comes to our assemblies, to our negotiations, everybody's like, Maria is jumping on Maria, because I think she's not only written the story of who we are, she's helped us realize who we are. She's put the mirror in front of our faces. And for anybody here who's ever worked in a bureaucracy, you know how hard it can be. But when you have somebody from the outside telling you that you've been weaving environmental conventions for 50 years, that you've been making a real difference in people's lives, it's uplifting. It's hugely uplifting. So thank you, Maria. And now, so we at UNEP, what do we do? Some people like to define us as the global EPA, the Global Environmental Protection Agency. Others like to say that we're a seamstress. I've heard that term being used. But basically, at the core of what we do is for 50 years, we've been weaving this tapestry of international norms and standards on the environment. Starting in 1972, and I don't know the history, not even remotely half as well as Maria does it, but starting in 1972, the organization has been, over the last 5 decades, building blocks on the different areas of environment. Now, these days, we try to categorize it as the triple planetary crisis of climate change, the crisis of biodiversity and nature loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. And so we now have, thanks to our forefathers, we have sort of a trifecta of frameworks that are created by different conventions in these 3 areas. We have science panels that inform the decisions that governments take in these 3 areas. The most famous of one, for example, the IPCC that you will have heard on climate change, but there's a similar one on biodiversity, and there's one in the making on pollution and waste, which hopefully, God willing, will be approved in the next month. And so we're helping countries come together, even when they strongly disagree with one another, and create these frameworks that enable cooperation on areas which are so dear to all of us and which are central to keeping this planet that we call home a place that we can all live in. And now, 2 years ago, actually, by now it's 2.5 years ago, Maria. Well, 2 years and 2 months ago, as Maria was describing, when she was part of the Rwandan delegation, some of you would ask you, how did she manage to get on the Rwandan delegation? I think she should tell you that story. But the Rwandan delegation, together with the Peruvian delegation, put forward a landmark resolution before our member states to agree on negotiating a new global treaty on plastics, on ending plastics pollution. And on top of that, to do a treaty, or to try to create a treaty that would cut across the entire life cycle of plastics. And believe it or not, it had been just a few days after the war in Ukraine broke out. Tensions were incredibly high amongst the member states, and yet they were able to put their differences aside and come together and agree to start negotiations. And frankly, that was yet another demonstration that the world is changing. This was a treaty that was presented, or this was a proposal that was presented by 2 developing countries that came to the fore and enabled everybody else to move forward. So we are excited by what those negotiations can bring about. They are complex, but we have amazing partners like Maria who are bringing different perspectives into those discussions, and we're hoping that by the end of the year there will be a global agreement that hopefully most countries in the world will ratify, and that hopefully will make a real difference in the lives of all of us.
Thank you. And so it's kind of heartening to kind of hear that people are coming to the table to kind of make things work. Back in February, we had an event with Professor Maya Cross, who is the director of our Center for International Affairs and World Cultures, who talked a lot about empathic cooperation, about how that kind of really taps into our humanity's like innate um, um, tendencies, I guess you can say, to collaborate rather than engage in conflict, especially in international relations and global affairs. And so I think that to kind of hear that that's actually happening as we think about what legal action looks like, starting from a place of negotiation as opposed to adversarial legalism, is called, that place of conflict, in that process is really heartening to hear. But it's kind of interesting. You talked about the Rwandan delegation, and Maria, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your kind of participation in the Rwandan delegation. But also, could you also elaborate kind of how interdisciplinary kind of processes, how you needed like a lot of different like types of like thinkers, doers, and dreamers at the table to kind of make that delegation work?
So the Rwanda story. It's the most uplifting story that there is. It's the story of Rwanda itself is a story of optimism. Many of us know Rwanda as the country that experienced genocide in 1994. And if you go to Rwanda today, you see a country that is healing. These things never heal once and for all. It is in the process of healing. And in that process, Rwanda has found the strength to do better. And with each other, and then as a society. And what Rwanda has decided to do better is to actually repair its relationship with the environment. And that has been such an uplifting story. Rwanda was one of the early countries to ban single-use plastics. 2008, Rwanda bans plastic bags. However, in Rwanda, when you ban, you ban. You go to jail if you bring in plastic bags. There are sanctions, and they are enforced. Kigali is one of the cleanest cities I have ever seen. It is also one of the safest cities I have ever been to. I started working in Rwanda in 2017 and in 2018, I took 30 students and faculty from UMass Boston to Rwanda for 10 days to experience Rwanda because of a National Science Foundation grant that we had on coasts and communities. And then I started working with the Minister of Environment of Rwanda, Vincent Biruta, who is now the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And at that time, I showed him the work. To Dean Tsai's point is when you are in a research university that produces research work that could be useful to policymakers, they hear you, they see you. And so we had produced an environmental conventions index that actually measures the extent to which countries fulfill their obligations under the various environmental agreements, many of which UNEP has crafted. And when I showed the report card for Rwanda to Minister Biruta, he said, I want an app for that. That was a long time ago. At the university I was at the time, I couldn't create an app for that. We now at Northeastern are closer to creating an app for that. The index now is online. And that was the beginning of my relationship with Rwanda, of giving that mirror to Rwanda. Here's how you've done. And the minister said, oh, who do I talk to? I'm going to talk to my people. Why are we not reporting on this convention? Come with me. We went to the room where the people he's working with. And why have you not reported? Since then, things are different. With Rwanda, with Switzerland, with other countries. When you help countries realize what they're doing just by the analytical work that you are performing. And so I did not ask to be on the Rwandan delegation because I had been working with them and because I had done this work on UNEP and understanding the UN Environment Assembly. Rwanda asked me to be on their delegation in March of 2022 because that was the first time that they were engaging in UNEA, in the UN Environment Assembly, planning to put forward that proposal for the resolution on plastic pollution. And that's how I became part of the Rwandan delegation, which is something that I take with great honor and humility. And yes, sitting behind the flag that says Rwanda is incredibly humbling. And that is also part of the work that I do on small states. And the power of small states in environmental multilateralism. As Raphael said, it was two small states. It was Rwanda and Peru that put forth this resolution for a global agreement on plastics. We are in the process of closing that deal because of these two small states. So just by connecting with people, by being genuine and trying to help, to actually contribute, it's not help. It's scratch that. That's not. Is actually trying to bring what you can to the spaces that you enter is the Rwandan story. And in a sense, this is the interdisciplinary story. And this is what we are actively nurturing in the policy school, is bringing in people who would enter any space, whether that is at the very local level in Roxbury or whether it is behind the flag of a country at the UN.
That's a great point as I kind of think about the work that I do in communities, around the world, but specifically, like I'm thinking about one here in the United States, about how bringing together different community members to address specific hyper-local environmental issues are helping them kind of see how what they're doing fits into what's happening at the global level and what's happening at the national level. And so I really appreciate that you made the point about in Rwanda, when they ban plastics, there are sanctions that go along with it that wind up at actual criminal offenses for actually using plastics. And so, Ray, I would love to hear from you as an experienced environmental lawyer, kind of like what are some of the, like, I think about like some of the bans that have happened here and like at the city level here in the United States and some of the controversy that has brought. But what do you see as some of the legal opportunities and challenges in environmental litigation and other types of legal action? And also, what do you see as probably most promising amongst what you're seeing out there that's happening?
Well, I think we're seeing a real transition in the environmental justice area. It seems to be finally getting some traction. It's an issue that Bill Riley was very interested in back in 1990. But we've had a real problem in this nation as we've shifted from 4 or 8 years of Republican leadership to then 4 or 8 years of Democratic leadership to stay a single course on controversial environmental issues. We tend to bounce pretty radically back and forth. So we didn't see a lot of progress in that for many years, but now I'm beginning to be hopeful that we'll get some sustained traction. Maria speaks of how Rwanda deals with environmental violations, and this may come from my starting of my career at the Justice Department, and then the fact that my first senior appointment was as the head of enforcement at EPA. Regulations and laws and policies are, in my view, pretty close to worthless if you don't have a strong enforcement a program behind them. One of the things that the United States has benefited from for years is having that strong rule of law and enforcement behind it. But you see a lot of other countries that struggle with that. You see it on biodiversity and poaching issues throughout Africa. You see it in airborne pollution and other pollution issues throughout Asia. So I think that that's a key opportunity internationally for the United States to try to help countries that are just initiating in this area more aggressively to do some, for want of a better term, tech transfer, and help them understand that a strong enforcement mechanism is key to having not only great laws and regs on the books, but ones that actually have an impact out in the real world.
It's an excellent kind of segue, and it's good. You said a tech transfer. I know that in classes we talk about policy learning, and policy learning processes is part of what we talk about in the policy school curriculum. Just for those students in the class, in the audience, sorry, who are kind of paying attention, we talked about it a little bit. But it also is making me think about, kind of coming back to you, Raphael, as I remember taking international law and international human rights law, and really a lot of the debate was around kind of what Ray was talking about around enforcement and the legitimacy of international law and policy when the enforcement mechanism relies so heavily on cooperation as opposed to coercion, which you can do at the state level more so than you can at the international level. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of how legal actions at the international level, especially things like courts and enforcement, kind of play into kind of some of the work that you're doing and some of the things we should be mindful of as you're going through the current negotiations for the Global Plastics Treaty?
So, I think obviously, and Ray is absolutely correct. It all depends on enforcement. You can have the best laws in the world, the best regulations. And I think where international action in general tends to fall short is obviously on the enforcement side. That's where it becomes harder. That's where countries don't want to give up their sovereignty. Now, what we're seeing is improvements in a number of areas. And I'll describe those in a second. But I do recognize that the enforcement piece is the piece that is limping the most, unfortunately, and is the piece that ultimately will define whether or not many of these regulations that are being passed at the global level and in many countries make a difference or not. Now, just today, for example, I don't know if any of you saw in the news that there's an international court associated with the International Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. So it has a tribunal that is meant to address disputes on the implementation of this international convention, which has 168 parties, not the United States, but there's 168 other countries that have signed up to this convention. Today, this court ruled that under its provisions, greenhouse gases constitute a pollutant that countries are supposed to address to ensure that they don't have nefarious impacts at sea. This, which may sound as a small step, creates the possibility in some jurisdictions for this opinion to then be used in litigation. There's other similar opinions that are pending with the International Court of Justice, with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. We have seen the European Union Court of Human Rights ruling against Switzerland for not upholding the rights of senior citizens to a healthy environment and arguing that that the Paris Agreement or that climate is a human right. We have seen the emergence over the last few years of a growing international recognition of the right to a healthy and clean environment. We've seen jurisdictions accepting the engagement or the participation of non-nationals pursuing cases, so extraterritorial jurisdiction in the space of environment. We have seen a huge growth in the number of climate-related litigation, with, I think, doubling in more than doubling in the course of 5 years. And yes, the bulk of it is happening in this country, with about 70% of all global litigation. but we're seeing growing environmental litigation, for example, in the developing world. And just over the last 5 years, it represented 17% of all litigation in the space. So I think there's a lot of things that are bubbling. And we see how legal actors around the world are beginning to get smarter in terms of how to use these global rules at the national level, how to use their courts. And so I think it's a time in which, yes, while enforcement mechanisms may be weak, there's many stakeholders out there that are trying to use different mechanisms to get have their say and have laws implemented.
Excellent. And so that is kind of making me think about, as you're thinking about like international laws and courts, how that kind of plays out at the national level, and then also how that can play out at the state, if not local level, in a lot of instances as well. And I think about like some of the work that's happening around community engaged and participatory approaches to going out and identifying and addressing issues. For example, at the EPA, there are certain rules and regulations that are enforced at the federal level, and then there are things that are devolved to the states of where they're provided as guidelines at the federal level, but then the state level is required to implement, and it requires a lot of community monitoring, citizen monitoring. And so in the environmental justice movement, we see a lot of communities getting actively engaged in collecting evidence to kind of demonstrate the harms that are happening right there in their local communities, and being able to use that to advocate for policy change, as well as even take other legal actions like suing different entities in the courts. And so I would love to hear from all of you kind of what you're seeing happening in the participatory space, and then also thinking specifically about in the legal process whether or not what community engaged, community and driven participatory efforts are doing, whether or not those can be successfully integrated into the legal processes given kind of evidentiary standards as well as just norms and practices, and how we think about evidence and who can generate valid knowledge and evidence.
Well, one of the great things about the environmental area is it's deeply interdisciplinary. Raphael said 75% of the climate litigation is happening in the United States. My guesstimate is something like 70% of all litigation happens in the United States. We are a profoundly litigious society. If you compare us to other nations, my guesstimate would be probably the most litigious society, which, by the way, is very good if you're a lawyer. So, as I'm reminded of the old Saturday Night line, litigation's been very, very good to Ray. So I think we're going to see that as part of that interdisciplinary development of evidence that can be used in court, more and more of it being developed by knowledgeable local witnesses. And although we tend in our area, in the environmental litigation area, to focus and rely heavily on experts, the reality is any witness that you can qualify onto the stand and any observations that they have are legitimate. I can get that evidence in before a judge. And frankly, in my trial experience, often those witnesses are among the most impressive on the trier of fact, on the jury or on the judge, depending upon whether they're doing a bench trial or a jury trial. Because sadly, it's sort of widely accepted in the United States that I can get an expert qualified to say virtually anything. But if I have an actual eyewitness who's saw it or is willing to testify about it and can get through cross-examination, then that's exceptionally helpful to my case, or exceptionally damaging if I can't blast them off their testimony in cross. So I think you're going to see more and more of it. And what I'm already seeing is a lot of it being aided by the developments we've seen in technology. we are now experiencing not just the local community activists saying, hey, I saw X. They're saying, hey, I set up a game camera and it ran throughout the night. And, you know, what are they doing with those drums in the middle of the night? That's tough testimony to beat. It's a good time to put together a plea agreement. So that's what I see is in the future.
Excellent. How about for you, Raphael?
So I certainly was going to contribute to the point on technology, but Ray has made it very eloquently. But that is one of the things that is doing is that it's turbocharging something that we describe as citizens science. So when you have citizens around the world that are going and collecting their measurements, and they get excited just because it's fun. Just over the last 2 years, my office worked with citizens in the Mississippi River Basin to collect samples to see where plastic was coming from. So they went around with a little app documenting pieces of plastic, and then we worked with the University of Georgia to create maps of the plastic pollution in certain areas of the Mississippi River Basin, and you saw huge excitement, and not just huge excitement from the environmental community, but from communities of people who use the river for their daily lives, for recreation, you name it. And I think citizens, that's helping demystify science, and that I think is also helping enable citizens to have data that then empowers them should they choose to go to the course or should they choose to publicly denounce instances of pollution or whatever it may be. So I think technology is really turning the tables around.
It's kind of interesting because, as someone who does research in this area, and I'm actually kind of looking at the different ways in which this citizen science kind of is done in different places around the world. And there are more than about 7 dozen names for what it's called. Everything from voluntary GIS to participatory science to community engaged research, PAR, participatory action research, all these different names. But it's really about kind of empowering people to kind of take their observed and lived experiences and getting it validated as data to be used in scientific processes as well as in legal processes. And Maria, I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of where you're seeing this kind of shaping up in the work that you do.
I wanted to take it to the international level again because of what we articulate. We don't have the courts there. You can't have the witnesses, and you don't testify quite in the same way that you would do at the national level, whether it's in the US or in another country. And so then what I have seen happen at the international level, especially with these negotiations, is how important the person-to-person connection becomes in an institutional way, in a high-level way. For example, how do we name a treaty? We have the Paris Agreement. We have the Stockholm Convention, the Basel Convention. Every treaty, international treaty, carries a name of the city where the diplomatic conference takes place before the countries really sign and then ratify. Now we have a plastics treaty underway. The question is, how do we name the treaty? Where will the conference, the diplomatic conference, take place? And you see immediately countries put in their bid. We have a bid for the Dakar Treaty by Senegal. We have a bid for Galapagos Treaty by Ecuador. And then I saw what cooperation at the international level can look like, and to create something totally new because of the connection between people, individuals, but at a collective institutional level. Because the third possibility is that we will have the Kigali Agreement. And that is of Kigali and Lima, the capitals of Rwanda and Peru. We do not have any international treaty that has the names of two cities.
Almost.
Well, that is the framework.
Yes.
It's a framework. I said
She
a
knows better
treaty.
than any of us, so there's no way I was going to get you on it.
No. That's the Kunming-Montreal framework, biodiversity framework. But we do not have an international treaty that carries two names, because you can't have two things happen at the same time in two different places. But now we can. And this is where Rwanda and Peru came together and said, why don't we propose something that is new, that is innovative? And it really suggests the collaboration that is necessary to solve this agreement. And they're proposing to have the diplomatic conference in Kigali jointly hosted with Peru, and then the first action conference in Peru jointly sponsored with Rwanda. And then you see how the narrative changes and the narrative of cooperation changes. And that's where that litigious spirit calms down until we have to figure out what to do with plastics. And so my thinking then about plastics and litigation, and this is something that, Ray, I'd love to ask you about, to kind of collectively think about this. But I've been thinking quite a bit about this because I see our faculty are here in the room, and I'm known now as the director who banned plastics. I'm the plastic police in the policy school. But what can we learn from big tobacco for plastic?
Mm.
And can we think of what happened with big tobacco and the litigation and seeing smoking and the health impacts? And how does that apply to the possible health impacts, human health, but also environmental health from plastics?
Yeah, I think that industry, particularly American industry, was somewhat surprised and shaken to see how the American tort system was able to deal with the tobacco companies and generate an enormous amount of litigation, some very substantial verdicts, and the costs driven with that. You're seeing a little bit of that concern now playing out with the climate change litigation against the oils, where, by the way, we represent the oils, so I can't say very much more about that. But I think industry is beginning to see the tremendous potential future downsides of products that could end up pushing them into that sort of litigation. And so they're beginning to manage their way around it with a lot more foresight than I would have seen in like 1990.
Yeah.
If I may come in, and this is beyond leaving the litigation aside, but there's one element to plastics, just like in any environmental challenge that we've seen since time immemorial, which is that there's always a transition when you move away from a certain way of doing things or a certain product. And when it comes to plastics, there are communities that are extremely concerned about the move out of the current plastics economy. And it's not just the big corporations or the big chemicals companies, but a community that gets a very limited voice and that we're trying to bring into these negotiations on plastics is the plastic waste pickers, or the waste pickers. There's about 10 million workers around the world every day who are picking trash. And most of them, they don't have good sanitary conditions like they would in this country or in other advanced economies. Most of them work in dump sites that are unregulated. They're exposed to fumes, they're exposed to pollutants, they're exposed to sudden fires. And they have been, thanks to the generosity of many member states that have enabled us to bring them into the negotiations, they have been coming and they have been saying, but what is going to happen to me if single-use plastics is phased out, if there's no longer that thing that I collect every day, what is going to happen to my living conditions? What is going to happen to my livelihood? And it's one of the features of current international negotiations is that the tent has been increased dramatically. Voices that 50 years ago would have probably never brought to the table are inside the room, are listening what the member states, what the parties, what the negotiators are saying to one another, and they get to speak. They get to put their arguments forward, and in this case, they get to talk about what a just transition out of something as ingrained in our lives as plastics would look like, or a single-use and problematic plastics, because obviously one also has to realize that there are plastics that we're not going to phase out. There are plastics that are integral to our healthcare. There are plastics that are integral to our mode of living. And that is not what these negotiations are all about.
That's a good point about like the transition, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, because I think about there's an organization based in Massachusetts, but they're working around the country actually piloting a kind of a replacement process for natural gas infrastructure, which I don't know if a lot of folks know that, I mean, just even having a gas connection in your home, there's been extensive research and published research about the kinds of chemicals that are just emitted, even if you never turn on your gas furnace or your gas stove, including 21 BTEX chemicals, which are known toxins that will kill you if you continuously inhale them and absorb them through your skin. And so I'm thinking about like that infrastructure. There are people working to replace that, but there's a huge, huge concern about especially the loss of jobs of people who work in these industries and kind of what's going to happen. And so they're actually piloting using the existing infrastructure and the existing workforce, but changing that infrastructure over to steam from geothermal. So you're actually using a much greener source. There, of course, are some challenges with geothermal and the whole process of actually putting it in geothermal structures, but they're a lot less toxic and a lot less dangerous, especially gas leaks. The city of Chelsea in Massachusetts can't keep street trees alive because of all the gas leaks, keeps killing all the street trees. I mean, we know that, you know, if steam releases, things might get hot a little bit, but it won't kill off everything in its path. And so, I mean, there are people who are actually being thoughtful about what transition might look like in a lot of different areas when we think about environmental policy, law, systems, and justice. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more just about transition, about what more we could be doing using either legal actions or non-legal actions to kind of help us think more broadly about transitioning.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that we have in America now at this phase of environmental awareness is, if you think back of when environmental awareness really started, modern environmental awareness did in the country in like the mid-70s, we had a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so we moved pretty fast to take care of that. And I'm afraid that sort of generated this notion that environmental problems can be solved quickly, by which I mean in 5 or 10 years. And the reality is we're done with the low-hanging fruit. You know, this stuff is now very, very tough. It's either integrated into our world like plastics are, or it's a transnational problem, or it's a industry that has all sorts of employees and employment impacts. And we would be well advised as a society to realize it's going to take a lot longer to solve the second and third generation environmental problems. And we're going to be a lot more successful solving them if we have identifiable transition plans that help out the folks who have benefited from those perfectly legitimate legal chemicals, businesses, industries, products. Because if we don't, you're going to end up with a lot of polarization and political resistance, which I think you're seeing and I was speaking to some of this group earlier, is, you know, when I started doing this in the 80s, we were popping out environmental laws about every couple of years. If you look at the span of when the Clean Air Act, you know, the 1977 Clean Air Act, the 1980 Superfund law, the 1982 RCRA law, the 1984 HISWA amendments to RCRA, and then there was like a 25-year period where we didn't pass a single environmental law because everything got polarized, and all the constituencies that sort of got blindsided by the quick progress we made decided that they were going to dig in and fight. So transition, I think, is key to lowering the temperature on those legislative and regulatory efforts.
You know, you mentioned a list of kind of, you know, things to kind of keep in mind. I also think that a lot of things that we're dealing with now are largely invisible. And so that is something as well. If, you know, having rivers on fire is one thing, but to actually have, you know, cancers forming in your body over 30 years because of the air you're breathing, that's something that's a harder sell. If people can't really see it, touch it, like in the here and now. So I think that's part of it too.
I had the great privilege to be Bill Riley's general counsel for 2 years. And Bill and I were truly an odd couple because I was a politically conservative Republican at that time, and he was a lifelong environmentalist. And I learned a huge amount from him because of our different perspectives on the world. And one of the things that he taught me was, you want to be successful in getting something, you know, accomplished in the environmental area, have something that people can look at and love. He came to the administration from WWF, and they had the Panda, obviously still do, and we fought with the White House on all sorts of environmental regulations. But when we had a regulation that was going to protect visibility in the Grand Canyon, man, that moved through OIRA like a hot knife through butter. Because nobody wanted to stand in front of that train.
Reminds me, Ray, of Bill Ruckelshaus,
Mhm.
the first administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And what Bill Ruckelshaus said also, when we convened all 5 UNEP executive directors in 2009, and Bill Ruckelshaus said, yes, in the 1960s and 70s, we had the see, feel, touch environmental problems. The rivers on fire, the smog, and we got motivated. Now you have things that you cannot see. And this is the discussion about plastics. This is where the indigenous peoples, the First Nations in Canada, come and say, we have levels of plastic in our blood, as all of us, and various communities, in our blood, in the brain, in the placenta. You see it much later, right?
Yeah.
But so, to your point, Ray, about that positive, what people would love, this is something that we have now started in the policy school of thinking about the beyond plastics vision, and how do we bring art and environment? Art that motivates. And there's 2 types of art in the plastic space. There's the art that UNEP had at the UN Environment Assembly with the 30-foot sculpture with a tap and a lot of plastic bottles falling out. It's like, turn off the tap. That's Benjamin Von Wong, the Canadian artist. Really powerful art piece. But it jolts you into action. It's like, that's something I don't want. What we do not yet have is what would jolt us into an action that says, this is what I would like. And that's where we've started working with an artist from Rwanda, Innocent Nurunziza, who we actually invited on the delegation of Northeastern. So he was a member of the Northeastern delegation at the negotiations. And he produces art on renewable tree bark that is positive art that inspires you to think of a different vision. And so I think, to your point, there's what would be the equivalent of the Grand Canyon or the Panda in this space that would inspire these new visions of citizen activism and the thinkers and the dreamers that we are now bringing up, because young people, they want to be activated, and where is that positive vision? And art might be a missing piece.
Indeed, and I can tell you that Innocent was a hit at the plastics negotiations back in Ottawa. But I think Ray, you got it absolutely right. I mean, we've done, or not just this country, but the world has addressed some of the easier problems. We at UNEP like to say that two of the biggest things we've done is to help heal the ozone layer, which is the result of a handful of gases. It's not the result of thousands of chemical compounds that you found in plastic. So the complexity is far greater. Or we believe we had something to contribute to ending lead in petrol, which is obviously lead has tremendous impacts on child development and their cognitive abilities. And now we're dealing with problems where oftentimes the emphasis is put on the negatives. What are the health impacts? But because we don't have that panda you were talking about, because we don't have that ability to imagine a different future, I think it's much harder. And I think one of the things that environmentalists need to do, or we need to do, I guess I can now call myself an environmentalist, is to help talk about a different future. What would a different, better future would look like? And that's what we need, that transversal input that Maria is talking about, because I think often the community in and of itself can take others' perspectives, and art is certainly helping us. But I think citizens ultimately would be probably more inspired by the notion that there can be a better future, let's say, without climate change, if we are at 1.5 degrees, and how that would look like, rather than telling them how awful it would be if we reach 2.5 or 3 degrees, let's say, when it comes to climate.
Well, I think that art is really leading the way, but also the whole world of writing. You know, you think about speculative fiction, whether that's sci-fi and fantasy is doing a really great job of painting a picture of what the world can be, like creating a normative environment. And I think that people across all generations really kind of resonate with. As a matter of fact, Grist Magazine is currently, they have their current okay, I'm going to say this phrase, and this is actually their phrase, creating a future that doesn't suck. That is their whole kind of premise of like creating their climate fiction competition. And so they do this process of having people really envision kind of what are the alternatives, like to the micro level, like what do schools look like in the future, like writing a story about that, to, you know, what does governance look like in the future, you know, global governance. I mean, so you have things across all scales that people are submitting these stories and kind of thinking about what 2200 might look like if we actually do things right. And so I think that there is a lot that's happening out there, and it's also heartening to see that a lot of community engaged and participatory action research is being led by a lot of artists, a lot of poets, a lot of writers, a lot of people with very creative minds who are thinking of a future that is very positive and focusing a lot less on the negative. And so I'm also just very conscious of the time, and I just want to open it up, see if there are any questions from the audience for our panelists today about kind of ways we can address environmental justice using the legal system or legal actions. I see a question over here. Do we have a microphone? If not, I can come over. And so if you could please just state your name. Oh, sorry, I'm wired, sorry.
You're wired.
Okay, I'm actually gonna have you come up, if you don't mind. Sorry, you get to be on camera. And I'll have you speak into the microphone, so.
You didn't drop it.
No, exactly.
My name is Carmen Rosa, and my question is, you, Mr. Ray, you brought up with regards, I'm gonna move a little back. You brought up in relation to the rise of the EPA and regulations, especially in the 80s, but also that was also during the time of the Cold War. Do you think with regards to what's going now with environmental justice and the governance, do you think there's just not enough push because we've dissolved, I wouldn't say dissolved, but we've pushed away from trying to be more governing in the more international sense because we're not trying to compete for these larger goals? in relation to that?
I think that the issues confronting the agency are more complicated now. They're more multidimensional. They're not as easily solved. And I think that the opposition to a lot of what the agency wants to do has solidified over the intervening 20 or 30 years. And we have a very polarized political process now. For somebody who had the opportunity and privilege to work in the government in the 80s and the early 90s, shockingly different process. So I think all those things are what's impeding swift progress. But the progress will be relentless. The wheels tend to turn, government tend to turn slowly, but they grind relentlessly.
Any other questions?
Other questions?
Yes, if you don't. I think this is one of our recent graduates. Yeah. So yeah. Congratulations. Yes.
Hello. Hello. Oh, my name is Sydney. And my question is, what would you say to all of you? What would you say, how has COVID been a factor that has affected the implementation of policies or procedures, whether on the national and global level, in terms of environment and environmental justice?
That's a great question. COVID has led to a lot more plastic, a lot more single-use plastic, and a lot more acceptance of it. Just not only for the medical use, but also in absolute everyday use. I have now made it a point that I am not going to have a cup of coffee if it is served in a paper cup. All paper cups are lined with plastic. If you have hot liquid in that, it's not recommendable. And so this morning, we just went around the cafes on M Street to find a cup of coffee. You can't. It's hard. And so, well, we bought the coffee cups in a store that also had cups, $18 mugs. It's like, I will buy that mug because I am not going to have a cup of coffee from a paper cup. And well, just looking around this space and how things are served in plastic cups, in plastic bottles, we have become desensitized to what this means. And I think partially, to a large degree, it is a function of COVID. We got told, oh, it's better for your health. I beg to differ.
Yeah, I think it also has to do a lot with logistics and the way in which now everything. I remember living in Seattle back when Whole Foods was brand new. And you would go to Whole Foods and nothing was packaged. You would take your containers in and you would actually get what you wanted out of the bins. There were very few things packaged, but they were all packaged in paper packaging. And then all of a sudden, a company buys Whole Foods. And now everything has to be packaged in plastic and barcoded, even that one organic pepper, so that they can actually send it to you in the online shipping process. And so then all of a sudden, COVID happens and people get used to not interacting with other human beings, which has broader implications beyond just plastic. But everything you now get, it used to be when I was a kid, we would actually have, very little garbage that went out. Now, taking garbage out regularly and it's all plastic film and it can't be recycled. So it is definitely, it's multi-level in the way in which we live, and trying to eliminate that out of our lives, yeah, same thing. Whenever possible, stay away from the paper cups unless they're compostable, lined with wax. But if you have a super hot cup of coffee, it's all melting anyway. So I mean, there's all kinds of challenges and issues there. But there are a lot of different systems that were already in place before COVID that have just been amplified as we purchase more and more stuff, and fewer stores even have the goods and products that we need. And so you have to buy online if you actually want basics. And so it's a greater regulatory supply chain product consumption problem. Yeah, so the question is about the Montreal Protocol and what made that so successful, and how can it be replicated?
Maria, I think we'll start with you.
No,
You're
no.
the one who's studying it.
You were UNEP. And
We're always pointing at the Montreal Protocol as a success. I mean, some would argue that the stars align in a unique manner and that they haven't aligned in the same way since. I personally think that that's a simplistic view. I think it was a different time for governments. It was a different time for industry. It was a different times for international cooperation. Trust was at a different level. And I think it's not the only example of success in terms of international cooperation. We've seen it phasing out lead in petrol. The last drop of lead in petrol was served 3 years ago in Algeria. That required significant international cooperation. It never gets spoken about like the Montreal Protocol does. But we like to think that while Montreal may be unique, success is possible and successful outcomes are possible in other environmental areas. But I want to turn to the academic to tell us her view as to why that was so successful.
Yeah, and I would also say for those who don't know what it is, it might help to have an overview, just a quick, just explanation of what it is, and then kind of like what led it to be successful.
well, everybody should know what the Montreal Protocol is, but it is indeed the most cited example of a successful international treaty to eliminate ozone-depleting substances. And it was signed in 1987, and I would say probably the explanation in my mind about why it was so successful is it's simple, but it's complex. It's simple because it's leadership. And the United States took a leadership position at the time, all the way from president to head of EPA, negotiators in the US. The alignment, but it was not by chance, it was purposeful alignment of leadership. This country took a position, and it took a position that, yes, we will do the right thing. A lot of the explanation that you would read often is, oh, but there were substitutes. I don't think the substitutes was what drove everything. And that's often such a simplistic explanation. And Ray, it would be great to hear what you think about that. But the leadership that this country had and what it was able to actually generate as a result of that was truly extraordinary.
Yeah, one of the things we don't do well in this country in environmental, in my view, is celebrate our victories. If I could put us all with the Beagle and the Wayback Machine, and we could go to the legislative debates of the 1990 Clean Air Act, we'd have been talking about acid rain. We'd have been talking about ozone holes. Nobody talks about that anymore. We solved those problems. We have solved a lot of problems in this country on environmental issues. You talk of Bill Ruckelshaus. One of the things that Bill did immediately upon taking charge of EPA is, oddly, he funded photographers to go around the country and take photos of America and the state of the environment If you ever look at those photos, you wouldn't recognize this nation. We have had huge successes. I think the Montreal Protocol was one of them, in part because America showed leadership and then immediately followed up on leadership. I think it's sad that the presidents involved there, Reagan and H.W. Bush, got no credit for it, either in the ballot box or otherwise. And that began, in my view, to be the alienation of one of our parties away from seeing value in bipartisanship in the environmental space. And we as a country have been paying for that. I also think that it was, as I said earlier, one of the more low-hanging fruit aspects of being able to do international cooperation. Not that it was easy, but it was not nearly as complicated as something like global climate change. So I think those are some of the things that made the Montreal Protocol as successful as it
That it makes me think about, talking about leadership. One of the purposes of our programs and the policy school is to help shape the next generation of leaders, help take people who are already kind of really committed to this work and preparing them to lead. And so I would love to hear from the panelists kind of what else do you think we should be doing as a university, but what should all universities be doing to kind of help advance environmental justice locally, nationally, and globally?
Well, I would say the universities can be great resources for the local communities in understanding and communicating on environmental issues. My experience with a lot of communities that get involved in this area without adequate technical support is the problems are so complicated, so have so many dimensions to them, that if the community activists aren't helped to understand that they don't have enough technical support, they come forward with sort of immediate and somewhat simplistic answers and demands. And then the experts in the agencies just shut them off. They just put them on disregard because they know that you're not going to just ban plastics. Plastics aren't just going to go away tomorrow because you tell them that that's just not going to happen in the real world. And if that's the only note you can hit as a local activist, then you get listened to politely and ignored. Where if you can deal with it in a more sophisticated way, you have the support from universities or other places to see it as a multidimensional problem it is and to help fashion a sophisticated, multi-pronged, long-term answer to it, well, then you're going to have real influence.
The thoughts about that?
So, and I mentioned it earlier today, I think at a time when power is quite distributed, where it's no longer just governments and corporations holding power, but also where collaboration is at times strained between actors, whether it's in government or whether it's in corporations. I think universities can be critical convening actors and create convening space in a non-threatening manner, informed by science, and help other actors that may find it hard to find solutions. So I was actually mentioning today, well, perhaps you could help us on plastics. You could help bring key negotiators from key countries in the coming months and help these negotiators meet in places that are not threatening, where they know they don't have to just speak their talking points or negotiating positions. They can try to find common ground.
So go ahead, Maria. Yeah.
Yes. So universities can be those really powerful convening spaces because we do provide that literal physical space, but also that intellectual space and space of expression This is at the core of universities, is the expression, the free expression of ideas. But universities are also the places where we nurture the minds of the next generation. And as the saying goes, the philosophy of the classroom of one generation is the philosophy of the government of the next generation. And it's really important that we in universities hold that dear and make sure that that philosophy is expansive, that that philosophy is global, it's common. It goes from the local to the global and back, and it takes the individual as part of the collective. And this is where I think universities hold a real unique power, but it's underused. And we need the push from the outside, and we need the buy-in from the leadership of the universities, where they do value scholarship with impact, and the leadership of the university has to value the engagement of the faculty in the real world. But so the more demand there is for that, and the more appreciation for it on the inside, I think we're going to see impacts of the work that universities, students, and researchers and faculty can do.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yeah. 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 And do you mind coming forward just so we can catch it? Yeah.
So, thank you. My name is Fatima, and I'm here with my daughter, who is just new grad. I just wanted to reiterate a lot of things that you said, especially you, Ray. So I am a geographer, and that's what I do. And I used to work for the Justice Department, and I can remember working under certain presidents with this justice initiative, environmental justice initiative, and the collaboration that, as a geographer in GIS, we actually built an app for the Coast Guard Office of Civil Rights to see how their dumping was impacting minority communities. And this was in the mid to late 90s. And I can just imagine with the technology not being as robust as it is now, what more we can do. We could build something, take it, come to a university, have your students just go out and run with it. So it's really exciting, but it's quite sad because I do think it's quite political. And where we were so long ago, I don't know if we can actually get there with all of this fighting. I mean, any thoughts on?
I mean, my view is the current American political system is broken. And, this is well beyond the topic that's on the agenda for today. But, if I had said to, I gather, anybody in this room, I had described some of the things that are going on today. An individual under the indictment for 36 or more criminal actions in 4 cases, and that person's the presumptive nominee of one of our 2 parties, you would have thought I was on drugs. So, and that's just, something off the top of my head. There's a bunch of stuff going on now that's truly weird. And I think we're going to have to get past that before we're going to be able to make leaps of progress in a lot of areas. Hopefully we will soon. It's hard to see the world making leaps of progress if this country is a sea anchor rather than a leader.
And I have to say that I don't think that they're that far off topic today because we're talking about legal actions to advance environmental justice. And I'm always reminded when the conversation comes up, well, this is about policy and this is about politics. It's kind of interesting that in Germany, policy and politics is the same word.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's just be mindful of the fact that the politics shapes the policy, which shapes the laws, which shapes the politics, and so on and so forth. It's all intertwined and interconnected. But I think that we, as a university, do have an opportunity through all of the different ways we're able to engage from local to global communities to be able to help kind of change that narrative and with shaping the thoughts and conversations with this generation, the next generation of leaders who could actually be leading here in the next 5 years. We can actually be making a change right now for the next generation. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you very much to all of our panelists for being here this evening. Thank you to all of you for joining us, both here in the room as well as online. Feel free to stay around. We have a gorgeous day in the nation's capital. So enjoy some food and refreshments. And we also have a roof deck where we will kind of take folks up if you actually want to go up and check it out before we kind of close everything down here at 8 o'clock. So thank you everyone for joining us.